Simon & Schuster Audio presents Star Trek: The Return by William Shatner with Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens. Read by William Shatner.
He fell, alone, twisting through the air of Veridian 3, the shriek of the metal bridge echoing in his ears, spinning, the sun flashing into his eyes, the shadows engulfing him, light, shadow, like the beating of wings, like all the days of his life, intersecting. In an Iowa cornfield, he sees the stars, a boy of 5 in his father's arms. In Starfleet headquarters, Admiral Nagura reaching out to shake his hand. "Congratulations, Captain, the Enterprise is yours." Then one shadow blocked the light, broke his fall. He turned his head, looked up, saw a face he recognized from the future. Did we do it? Did we make a difference? The other, in his odd uniform, but with the familiar touchstone of Starfleet on his chest, knelt by his side. "Oh yes, we made a difference, thank you." This stranger, this Picard, had offered his friendship. In another lifetime, perhaps, it might have been so. Least I could do for the captain of the Enterprise. Voices called him from the darkness. Through the latticework of the twisted metal above him, he glimpsed the edge of something moving, something coming closer. It cut through sky, through light and shadows. The final wisps of existence lifted from him in a feathered haze of light, revealing all that lay beyond, still to come. Oh my. And then he fell again, alone. James T. Kirk was dead. As Commander William Riker resolved from the transporter beam beside the grave of that Starfleet legend, he was surprised by the sudden thought that had come to him. Of all that had happened on this desolate world of Veridian 3 only a month ago, the fate of James T. Kirk weighed most heavily on his mind. Half a planet away, the shattered hulk of the USS Enterprise lay in ruins, slowly being carved into transporter loads of recyclable scrap by a team of Starfleet engineers. Though the ship was beyond salvage, in accordance with the Prime Directive, no trace of it could remain on this world. In the days that had passed since the Enterprise had blazed through the atmosphere of Veridian 3 to her first and final landing, Riker's thoughts still kept turning to the fate of the captain of an earlier Enterprise, the first Enterprise. On a distant outcropping, Riker saw a lone sentinel, the dry desert wind shifting the elegant black robes he wore. He had come from Romulus, against all logic, Spock. Riker knew the Vulcan ambassador had worked with Kirk as a living, breathing individual, yet Spock was also as much a legend. What could it be like, Riker wondered, to lose a friend, then 78 years later, to lose him again? A few days after the crew of Riker's Enterprise had been rescued, Starfleet intelligence had mounted an emergency extraction mission to bring Spock from the home world of the Romulan Star Empire to Veridian 3 so he might accompany his friend on his final voyage. The extraction was not an operation to be undertaken lightly. Relations between the Romulans and the Federation had been strained for centuries. Spock was instrumental in the efforts to reduce those tensions by decades of secret negotiations intended to reconcile the Romulans with the Vulcans. Though the Romulans were an offshoot of the Vulcan race, they had rejected the logic which had saved their Vulcan ancestors from succumbing to their primitive, passionate, blood-drenched beginnings. So who better than Spock, a child of emotional humans and logical Vulcans, to understand both sides and work for unification? On the horizon, the last radiant spike of the dying sun flared, then vanished behind a distant peak. Overhead, stars emerged from the deepening twilight. Far away, Riker saw Spock bow his head, as if lost in memory. Riker, go ahead.
Commander Riker, this is Kilborn.
For a heartbeat, the static cleared, and Kilborn's distraught voice cut through the Veridian night.
Can't tell where they're coming from. 2 shuttles gone. We need...
Riker tapped his badge again. Riker to Ambassador Spock. A moment passed. Then the deep, familiar voice answered,
Spock here.
Ambassador, there appears to be some trouble at the salvage site. I'm going to have to ask you to remain here while I beam back to check the situation.
Of course, Commander. What is the nature of the trouble?
I'm not sure. It almost sounds as if they're under attack. Spock said nothing more. Logically, there was nothing more to be said. Riker to transporter control, beam me to the salvage site. In the cool tingle of the transporter effect, the grave site shimmered. And then Will Riker beamed into hell. Driving rain sprayed through the ragged hole of the canopy of the portable transporter platform, drenching Riker the instant the transporter's exclusion field shut down. Riker shouted over the storm to the officers near him, "Move! Move!" He shoved ahead toward the steps that led to the Duraplast walkways linking the buildings of the salvage camp spread out before him. The bombarded camp had become a collection of looming shadows, except when the sky blazed with alien fire. Riker caught up with Lieutenant Beru. She leaned over the walkway railing, staring to the east, where a sputtering ball of plasma flared against the duranium skin of the Enterprise's lifeless saucer. A wave of heat blasted him from the side as a barracks building detonated in a rocketing fountain of blinding plasma fire. Flaming debris arced downward. Riker grabbed Beru's arm, yanking her off the walkway into the mud. An enormous thunderclap reached out and scooped them up from behind, tossing them into the rain. Beru's arm flew away from his grasp. Riker twisted as he fell through the hiss of crisscrossing shrapnel and hit cold mud. He rolled free and struggled to his feet. "Lieutenant Beru!" He could see no trace of Beru or other officers who had been close by. "Commander Riker!" Riker wheeled to see Beru struggling toward him. She was layered in mud. She limped, one hand wrapped tightly over her shoulder. The other arm hung uselessly. "Who's doing this, sir?" Riker had no idea, not even suspicions. "We have to get to a shuttle, Lieutenant." Beru's gaze swept the camp. "There won't be any shuttles." Riker took hold of her good arm. "We won't know till we look. This way." More explosions shook the saucer hull. Riker's jaw tightened as he heard screams blend with the roar of the unseen craft, the hum of their weapons, the roar of the flames. They skirted the burning mound of wreckage that had been a storage warehouse. Beyond it, Riker could see the smoking pits that were all that remained of the shuttle pads. 2 Tesla-class shuttles lay in pieces nearby, split open like used packing crates. Kilborn was there. 4 engineers worked with him. Riker called to Kilborn. "Who are they?" Kilborn looked up at him with shadowed eyes. "I don't know. They took out the Farragut." Riker felt acid course through his stomach. The only other Starfleet vessels in the Viridian system were a handful of transport freighters and engineering support cruisers. Without the Farragut, the survivors of the salvage camp were at the mercy of its attackers. "Then what are they after?" Kilborn shook his head. "I don't know. There's nothing important left in the Enterprise. All the tactical computer cores were pulled on the first day. Phasers, shields, everything classified has already been taken out." Kilborn held out his tricorder. "Whoever they are, they're flooding us with sensor scans. They know where each one of us is. We've got to retreat, Commander, into the forest." Riker looked at the engineering shuttle. It couldn't fly, but that wasn't all it was good for. "Does this shuttle still have demolition charges?" Kilborn thought Riker must be crazy. "You can't be serious, sir." Riker grabbed the haggard chief engineer by his shirt front. "Starfleet doesn't run. I want both torpedoes prepped for atmospheric detonation." Kilborn's high voice shook. "Commander, the second you turn on the shuttle's targeting system, whatever's attacking us is going to incinerate us." Riker smiled grimly. "Probably." It took less than 2 minutes to prepare the torpedoes for simultaneous activation, target lock, and launch. Riker turned to Kilborn. "Get your people out of here." Riker felt Beru's hand on his arm. "Sir, you can't do this alone." "Don't worry, Lieutenant. I plan to live forever." Riker punched a command sequence into the tricorder. Then he hefted the tricorder in his hand and threw it into the storm. It landed 50 meters away, disappearing into the mud. "In 30 seconds, Lieutenant, that tricorder is going to put out a signal that makes it look like a phaser bank coming online." Beru smiled. "A distraction." Riker jerked his head to the side. "Go with Kilborn. Head into the forest." Then Riker pulled himself through the off-angled door of the shuttle out of the rain. Inside, the flight deck was at a 20-degree slope. Riker braced himself on the co-pilot's chair as his mud-coated boots slipped on the traction carpet. He activated the shuttle's torpedo substation. Swiftly, he set the torpedoes to target any moving object 100 meters in altitude or above. As soon as the panel confirmed his input, he hurried back through the shuttle's cargo hold to the airlock door. The instant he appeared in the doorway, a green bolt of energy hit the mud 50 meters in front of him, vaporizing the tricorder in a spray of steam. Riker felt a rush of relief. The distraction had worked. But the beam did not shut off. It pushed on through the mud, rending it like water before the prow of a ship, closing on the second weapon signal, the shuttle. Riker gripped the sides of the door and pushed to leap free. His boot slipped. He fell, chest slamming into the raised ridge of the airlock seal. He felt a rib crack and looked up to see the inexorable green bolt crackling toward him 10 meters away. The beam reached out for him. A hand grabbed his wrist. "Commander!" Beru hadn't left him. She hauled him out of the shuttle with desperate strength. All in that one terrible moment as she hurled him away from her to safety, he heard her cry, heard the hiss of vaporized flesh, heard the hum of torpedoes launching. The shuttle sliced in two. He rolled onto his back in time to see two ionized streaks of plasma exhaust bank into the storm clouds as the torpedoes sought their targets. The clouds lit up like dawn. Riker carefully, painfully drew himself up into a sitting position. He saw Beru's hand, outstretched, reaching for him, out of the mud. He gripped it, pulled, and the hand and the forearm and nothing else of the young lieutenant slipped from the mud. Riker dropped the hand in horror. Hellish fires from the camp and the saucer still lit the low, roiling clouds, but there were no more explosions, no more screams of low-flying craft. Warm rain bathed his eyes, gentle as tears. The attack was over. And Riker knew he couldn't rest until he had found those responsible and answered the question, why? Alone in the darkness by the gravesite, Spock had found a rock to sit on. He was 143 standard years old, advanced middle age for a Vulcan in good health. For almost half an hour he maintained his position, observing moving points of light against the stars and the streaks of multicolored light that were exchanged between them. Starships in orbital battle. The night air thrummed. Something large was approaching through the sky. Spock rose slowly to his feet. He could see nothing, but his robes began to swirl around him, blown about by some kind of backwash. Directly above him the stars wavered and then disappeared, blacked out by a silhouette of something he couldn't identify. A sudden light danced at the edge of his vision. Spock looked down the slope toward Kirk's grave. Amber rays spiked out from between the rocks of the simple cairn. The light emanating from Kirk's grave brightened, then began to fade. Spock clearly heard the sounds of rocks falling against themselves. Among the stars, the signs of the space battle ended. Above Spock, the watching stars returned, and the thrumming backwash ceased as suddenly as if a ship had gone to warp. Spock drew an emergency light from his belt and made his way down the slope to Kirk's grave. He played the light against the cairn. The rocks had fallen in. The grave was empty. Spock looked to the stars. It was not at all logical, but for a moment a most improbable thought came to him. Perhaps some journeys were never meant to end. There were always possibilities. High above Iridian 3, flashing in sunlight, A 30-meter-wide slab of curved duranium hull metal slowly spun in the silence of space. The black letters etched into its surface read USS Farragut NCC 60597. It was the largest piece of debris that remained of the starship. The rest was a cloud of dazzling shards, slowly dispersing. On board the Avatar of Tomed, the Romulan commander Salatrell watched the hull metal impassively on the main view screen of her bridge. Beside her, she could sense Sub-Commander Tran's elation.
A great victory, Commander.
Salatrell turned in her command chair.
This was no victory. They had no reason to expect us. They had no warning. It was an operational procedure, nothing more. What of Kirk?
Her science officer answered from the engineering console, where transporter displays flashed.
DNA analysis confirms identity of the remains, Commander. When the attack craft docks, the remains will be beamed directly into the stasis unit.
For the first time since this mission had begun, Salatrell permitted herself a small smile. She sat back in triumph.
Decloak, and prepare to receive incoming craft.
She glanced up at Sub-Commander Tran, who remained standing beside her.
We'll have our war soon enough.
Tran's eyes narrowed with predatory anticipation.
War and victory.
Over the centuries, the Dante field had been mapped, explored, and abandoned by every space-going culture in the sector. Whatever its origin, each of the thousands of asteroids in the field was worthless and without interest. The Avatar of Tomed decloaked as she dropped from warp on the outskirts of the Dante field. Moving with deceptive grace near the field's center, the Warbird closed on one large asteroid without slowing until its impact was inevitable. But then one small part of the asteroid surface rippled with holographical distortion as the Warbird made contact and passed safely through. Inside the hollow body beyond the holographic camouflage, the rough interior was studded with directional grids of docking lights. 8 other Warbirds were docked within the main cavern, with 27 Romulan birds of prey, more than 100 scout ships, and uncounted other smaller vessels. Without a doubt, Dante Base was on a war footing. The Tomed followed the line of pulsing lights that guided it to its bay. Soon, Salatrell was deep within the hollowed-out asteroid. She ignored the tunnels that led to her private quarters. She headed through 2 sets of blast doors to arrive at the ultra-secure secondary docking cavern where the other ship waited. Its method of docking had been unorthodox. Instead of the clean seal between adaptable docking rings, the other ship appeared to have grown into the metal and rock of Dante. Tendrils of cable and connecting conduits spread out of the portal-like connective tissue, anchoring the ship to the asteroid, not in one place, but hundreds. Once she was within the ship, Salatrell followed the Romulan markings that led her to the security doors. As the doors unfolded, Salatrell smelled the slightly fetid odor of the liquid that pulsed through the twisted pipes that lined the chamber, an overlay of technology, both alien and Romulan. Myriad light channels snaked along the curved walls, angling in through the empty air to converge like a web on the immense machine at the heart of the chamber. Unaccompanied, Salatrell approached the Ark. That was the name her scientists had given to the alien machine's central component. An elongated container 3 meters along its widest axis, made from bulging, asymmetrical panels of a transparent mineral, bound by gilded struts of gold wire. She glanced into the shadows of the control pit facing the Ark in the center of the chamber. Among the Romulan computers, the technicians worked in the darkness. A scientist's voice echoed from hidden speakers.
Transporter systems are online.
Then someone called to her from that darkness. The technician, now called Vox, the warrior, who had once been her lover.
Commander, it is time.
She released her breath. Proceed. Responding instantly, the alien machine began to vibrate. A rhythmic thudding shook the scarred metal deck. Mist spilled out of the control pit where the Romulan computer consoles had been installed to operate the device. The broadcast voices of the scientists and the technicians rattled through the rest of the system's check. A slow wave of light within the liquid-filled arc quickened rhythmically with an orange gleam that fractured into stabbing golden flickers. An energy discharge crackled off a resonating coil 100 meters away, lighting the vast chamber with the uncontained fury of a storm. Then the light in the arc began to fade. A shadowy mass now became visible in the dense, murky liquid. Desiccated, corrupted, monstrous remnants of the hated past floating before Solitrel. She heard a technician's voice.
Now confirming nanite transmission.
A sudden flash and explosion from the machine's flank sent sparks cascading through the chamber. Vox calmly announced,
Medical team to the Ark.
Solitrel reached the scaffold first. The Ark was 2 meters above her. She stared up into its darkened heart, saw the shape within, saw that shape move. She leapt for the ladder, 2 of her scientists close behind her. The shape within the Ark struggled, arms flailing. She grabbed a tool from the startled scientist's hands, spun it around, and smashed its handle on the transparent panel. A gout of liquid sprayed into her face. She clawed at the edges of the shattered panel and tugged at the metal band between the broken panel and the next. Her face was smeared with the Ark's nutrient fluid. It tasted bitter, salty, like an ocean choked with life. "Get him out! Get him!" She gasped as a hand shot up from the Ark, grabbed her arm, and drew her into the suffocating depths of the Ark. But to die now, here with him, was not why she had risked her life, her name, her world. Solitrel pulled back in the awful darkness of the Ark until the terrible hand slipped off her arm, and she stumbled back and out free, except the dark shape settled in the fluid, no longer moving. "No! Live!" The dark liquid erupted from the Ark like the impact of a gathering, rushing wave. The scaffolding gave way in one corner, sending the 2 scientists tumbling to the deck below, but Solitrel did not fall. She felt the hand return, this time grabbing her neck. Solitrel gripped the muscled forearm with her own torn hands. She looked up and saw Kirk. Eyes alive with a madness she could not comprehend. The flesh of his shoulders and neck twisted and shimmered as its contours changed, reformed, and realigned by the microscopic nanite devices that still worked within him, restoring him, rebuilding him. His mouth gaped open as he heaved with deep, desperate gasps for air. Solitrel pawed at her own throat, felt the acid pain of air rushing into a ravaged throat. A different hand joined hers in the struggle. Vox saved her. He stood before her, holding Kirk in place without effort. For a moment she was confused. Her beloved was before her, standing in profile, his noble Romulan brow high and defiant. Then he turned to her, and the nightmare returned. Half his face was gone, obscenely replaced by black circuitry patches, laser sights, tubes, and coils of bioneuronic implants, the inescapable hallmarks of assimilation. His old name was no longer a part of him, along with everything else he had been. He was Vox, now. Romulan speaker of the Borg Collective. The alien machine stirred, rumbling ominously. Vox turned to her.
We must leave the chamber.
Solitrel nodded, unable to speak. Kirk's body was frozen in contorted posture, his strength no match for the implanted manipulator that had replaced Vox's right arm.
We will take him to the medical facilities in Dante Base.
Solitrel backed away as the Borg Romulans took Kirk from Vox. Kirk's ancient uniform hung in tatters, destroyed by the energies that had coursed through him once his body had been transported into the Ark. He walked stiffly, like an Oroto, the living dead of Romulan myth. Solitrel found that fitting. Amazing. In 10 days, that creature will cause the Federation itself to fall before me.
You're wrong. We have made an agreement. The Federation will fall before us.
Solitrel nodded, relieved that Vox had meant nothing more than what she had already accepted. Romulans and Borg working together. It was the price she had paid to restore the hated James T. Kirk to life. In 10 days, she would know if it had been worth the bargain. Most Starfleet vessels were duranium white, but some Starfleet vessels were as dark as the void between the stars, intentionally coated in micro-diffracted carbon to absorb all visible radiation that fell upon them. The USS Monitor was one such vessel, the latest in the Defiant class, space black, on silent running, closing in on a dying, ancient world deep in the core frontier. Its destination, New Titan. Overpowered, densely shielded, excessively armed, carrying more weaponry than 3 Galaxy-class starships, she was the result of Starfleet's fevered preparations to fight a war against the Borg, a war that had yet to come to pass. But there were always possibilities. The Monitor eased into a non-standard polar orbit over New Titan. The only sign of its presence was the winking out, then the reappearance of the stars it passed. Its double-sealed hangar door opened. A small personnel shuttle emerged, propelled by low-gain tractor beams, undetectable past 10 kilometers. It moved away from the Monitor, dropping for New Titan like a falling lance. The pilot, tightly strapped into her seat, maintained her calm expression and kept her hand steady on the controls. Behind her, her 5 passengers clung to the bench seats running along both sides of the shuttle's hold. Their expressions were unknown, for each wore a carbon-black combat helmet with an opaque blast shield in place, capable of deflecting a full-force beam from a Type 3 phaser. The rest of their black uniforms were as heavily armored. 3 of the passengers braced themselves with phaser rifles. The only identifying insignia they wore was the Starfleet Delta slashed by a bolt of red lightning, the crest of Starfleet's newest specialist division. That and their name tags: Wineline, Bayer, Cruel. Instead of weapons, the other 2 passengers carried sealed equipment pods. They also wore name tags: Crusher, Picard. Jean-Luc Picard felt himself shift as the shuttle slowly banked. He opened his helmet. Across from him, Wineline lifted her own blast shield and yanked open her helmet's visor. She was mostly human, though there was a hint of alien heritage in the assured gaze of her dark eyes. With a black-gloved fist, Wineline tapped the helmet of Bayer beside her. He opened his helmet as well, fully human. Bayer tapped the helmet of the 3rd team member. Cruel lifted his shield, opened his visor, and grunted, sweat gleaming from the ridges of his crested forehead. Klingon. Wineline looked at Cruel. "You still complaining?" Cruel bared his teeth at her. "Human battle gear, too much protection, not enough weaponry." Wineline unfastened her seat web and leaned over to tap Beverly's helmet. "We'll be over the drop zone in 300 seconds. Picard and Beverly looked at each other past the confines of their battle helmets, and Beverly whispered, "This isn't a side of Starfleet we see very often." Picard forced himself to smile. "It's a big galaxy, Doctor." He caught sight of the equipment pod strapped to her waist. He knew it carried the interface. Beverly followed his gaze to see what he looked at. She reached out to put her hand on his. "It will be all right, Jean-Luc. We won't have to use it." Wineline stood up, then moved to the rear of the shuttle and pulled down 3 times on a side-mounted manual release lever. 30 seconds. The rear decking of the cargo hold dropped open onto darkness. Exactly as they had trained, Picard and Beverly sealed their helmets and got to their feet. Wineline watched the readout on her tricorder. She raised a finger, paused, brought it down, pointing to Cruel. Without hesitation, the Klingon stepped over the open deck and dropped through it. Then Wineline pointed at Picard, and as he had done a dozen times in the Monitor's holosuite, he stepped out into nothingness. He flipped over, dangling feet first, with still no sensation of falling, though he knew from the training simulations that the surface of New Titan was rushing up at him at 50 kilometers per hour. He looked up and saw the densely packed stars of the galactic core. A dark object moved against them, then slowed. Beverly, he decided, or Wineline. He rocked in his harness as the anti-gravs on his back began to work harder. The harness dug into Picard with a sudden, sharp snap. His holodeck training paid off as he reflexively swung his legs together and bent his knees. Then he slammed into dirt and rolled as he'd been trained. A moment later, Beverly hit and rolled an arm's length away. Before Picard could speak, he felt Krull and Bear behind him, soundlessly detaching his anti-grav units from the back of his harness. Bear was the first to break the silence.
They tracked us.
He pointed ahead where a Starfleet blue phaser beam cut through the night from the horizon and found an unseen target that flared in a silent explosion. Picard recognized the glimmer of an antimatter reaction. Beverly looked shocked.
Was that our shuttle?
Wineline nodded. The pilot had to activate the engines to climb out of the atmosphere, which means the sensor fields they're using are more sensitive than we thought. Give me a reading, Krull. Starfleet phaser cannon? Krull growled in acknowledgement. Wineline glanced at Picard. That's a good sign. It means whoever's there is making do with the equipment at hand. They haven't brought in anything new. Picard was troubled by Wineline's apparent complacency. Our pilot just died. How can that be a good sign? We all knew the risks, Captain. Wineline pointed ahead. 2 kilometers, double time, Krull on point. Startled again by her directness, Picard began running, keeping Krull's sensor shadow centered in his visor. He could hear Beverly's matchy pace just behind him. Wineline and Bear ran behind Beverly. The terrain of this region of New Titan was rough, strewn with boulders. It reminded Picard of the nature preserves on Mars. 15 minutes and 2 kilometers later, Krull waved them to a stop at the base of a low hill. Wineline stood before them, commanding their attention. This is it. All systems power down. Stay low. Her hands hit the controls of her forearm pad. The green glow of her night vision display faded from her helmet. Picard did the same and blinked as his eyes adjusted to the star glow. Then they looked over the rise, and Picard's throat suddenly felt as dry as the rocks he lay across. In a barren arroyo, where half a kilometer away, a plasteel perimeter barrier glowed in the glare of fusion-powered spotlights, lay their first objective, Starbase 804. By the manuals, what lay before them was a Type 7 forward reconnaissance starbase, standard issue on Class M planets where atmospheric domes were not required. But this starbase was no longer standard issue. Wineline pointed straight ahead. Captain, do you confirm what I see? Picard swallowed painfully. Floodlights sprayed up the sides of Starbase 804, bringing every centimeter of chaotic detail into hideous relief. Pipes and conduits, duranium sheets, prefab housing sections, even parts of the shuttles that should be on the pad. There were traces of everything used in the construction of the starbase, now taken apart and reassembled into one of the most basic shapes of technology, a cube. Picard slowly nodded. I confirm. Wineline brought her forearm up to her helmet and tapped a single control, then transmitted in a theoretically undetectable microburst to the monitor far above them in polar orbit. Archangel, this is Red Leader. We have positive confirmation. Repeat, positive confirmation. Starbase 804 has been assimilated by the Borg. Within their armored gloves, Picard squeezed his hands into fists, preparing himself for what he knew must come. He was running out of possibilities. Picard ignored the distant whisper deep within his mind and walked among the Borg alone. All around Picard, they went about their task of assimilating Starbase 804. Teams of them worked as little more than ants or termites, using their biomechanical implants and augmentations to carve up the prefab buildings, remove the Starfleet equipment, and process everything for the greater good of the collective. After Viridian 3 and his encounter with the Nexus, Picard had been sure he would draw at least a year behind a desk. A Galaxy-class starship had been lost on his watch. The boards of inquiry alone would take months. But Starfleet was nothing if not responsive and realistic. Picard's testimony had taken less than half a day. He was still reeling from the speed of the inquiry and its conclusion as he and Will Riker had left the hearing room. And only when Picard saw Commander Elizabeth Shelby waiting for him did he understand that Starfleet had its own reasons for dealing with the Enterprise hearing so quickly. She waved Picard into an empty office and bluntly stated the facts. Starfleet intelligence had reason to believe that a series of distant outposts on the core frontier were being raided by the Borg. Picard protested. But the Borg are defeated. He had seen it himself. Hundreds of the once mindless creatures had been awakened to their own individuality. The threat of the collective had been removed. Captain, it is Starfleet's belief that what you contacted, what you and your crew defeated, was only one branch of the collective. A single tentacle, if you will, of a monster that's spreading through the galaxy. Do you honestly think you have changed anything by changing just the handful of Borg with which you have had personal contact? We're not saying we believe that facing the Borg is a hopeless proposition. You were able to neutralize one branch. To us, that clearly implies the other, yet to be engaged branches can also be defeated. At that, Picard had disagreed vehemently. But whatever strategy we use on one branch, the next branch instantly knows how to defend itself. Shelby had smiled at his passion. We're not just going after the branches, Captain. We're going after the head. Somewhere out there is the central point from which all the branches emanate. We shall find that source, and we shall destroy it. Then she had given him his new orders. Picard was to join the tactical team to be based at Starbase 804. Once there, when suspected Borg activity was detected, Picard was to be deployed with Starfleet's new anti-Borg specialists. The mission objective: the capture and return of a Borg vessel. 4 years ago, Picard himself had been assimilated, made part of the Borg collective and its irresistible group mind. As Locutus of Borg, he had actually led the collective against Starfleet in the devastating Battle of Wolf 359, giving the Borg full access to every Starfleet secret locked in his mind. And though every trace of Borg technology had been surgically removed from his body, in his mind, the tendrils of the collective remained, and Starfleet knew that. Shelby had put the pieces of the interface on the table then, the latest from Starfleet R&D. The interface filled him with inexpressible dread. One part was simply an insulated cable containing a microprocessor on one input jack and a slender transformer on the other. The other was a sleek power cell coupled with a short-range subspace transmitter small enough to be carried unseen in a hand. But the third piece was an asymmetrical plate of silicon, curved to fit the contours of the human face and skull. In this case, Picard's face and skull. Together, they formed a Borg-derived neural interface, just like the one that had been implanted in Picard's flesh and in his mind. Then Commander Shelby had informed Picard, "You will be accompanied by Dr. Beverly Crusher. She's already been briefed." Except for Beverly, Picard had had no contact with his crew since that day. "We require the protective device encasing your sensory stump." The flat, emotionless voice startled Picard from his reverie. A Borg barred his path. Once it had been human, female, Starfleet. Beneath the cybernetic augmentations fused to its chest and ribcage, he could see the remnants of a Starfleet duty uniform. Its communicator was still in position. Borg wires extended from it and entered that abused skin in a seemingly random series of small puckers. A thicker red cable ran up from the communicator and into its temple. Whatever it had been, it was a Borg now. Manipulator arm extended, a cutting blade whirring. "Are you defective? I will give you my protective device." Picard knew if he did not remove his helmet now, the mission would be over before it had begun. The Borg held out its living hand. Picard gave her the helmet, keeping his head downcast, eyes averted. The Borg did not step away. "You will direct your visual sensors upward." Picard took a deep breath and looked up. "Locutus?" The Borg who stood before Picard looked troubled, because the collective was troubled. Locutus was physically here, but not present among their joint thoughts. The Borg trained its manipulator arm on Picard. The thin blue rod of an X-ray welding unit glowed along the mechanical arm. The collective had long ago evolved the behavior to treat anomalous phenomena as threatening and therefore subject to immediate destruction. At this moment, Picard was a threat. But he also knew how the Borg functioned. Picard looked at the Borg. "Are you defective?" Whatever the Borg had been about to do, its primary behavior was now circumvented by a diagnostic subroutine. A verbal order from Locutus had been enough to trigger it. Picard saw no sign of the rest of the Wineline's team. Each had planned to enter the base separately to avoid attracting the collective's attention. They were to rendezvous in 2 more hours. Finally, the Borg responded. "No defects detected." The Borg angled its head, communing. "Locutus is missing. You are defective." The X-ray welder began to glow, began to whine, as its quantum capacitor built its charge. Picard stumbled back as the female Borg suddenly shimmered in a blaze of phased energy, then vanished. Picard looked around, saw Sue Wineline 3 meters away. "Have you been following me?" "Captain, my job is to get you to that cube ship. Keep walking." Wineline tossed him his helmet. Picard pulled the helmet on, closed the visor, and marched forward. He wished he were somehow locking Locutus back into his deep and hidden cell somewhere in his core, but he knew it was too late. All around him, he heard the whisper of the collective, though whether it sprang from the Borg or his own subconscious, he could not be sure.
Come back, Jean-Luc. Come back. Spock.
Kirk ran, calling for help. Something chasing him. Into the bowels of the ship, running, always running, changing the rules. Nothing made sense. Horses, Antonia, the stars in space, the man in the strange uniform, Starfleet uniform.
Picard.
Jumping through space, through time, falling. Yosemite.
Spock.
He hadn't been alone in Yosemite, climbing the mountain, but this time he was, until he felt the pressure of a cold cloth on his forehead. He reached for it, needed to take it away. Shh. He moved the cloth and saw he didn't know her. She spoke softly. "Do you know where you are?"
The Enterprise?
The woman shook her head. "Do you know who you are?" Of course he did. He smiled, opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Panic. "It's all right. I know who did this to you. You were very brave." Kirk felt relief. People counted on him, all 430 aboard the Enterprise.
The Enterprise? What is it? Where am I?
"You were injured in battle." Kirk was aware of a cool breeze across his chest. He looked down, expecting to see a uniform of some sort, but what kind of uniform? He saw nothing. Who was he?
You said I was injured? In battle?
Against the enemy. She picked up a small pad and pressed a control. A far corner of the stark room faded away. This is the enemy. The viewpoint in space shifted. A vessel came into view. Kirk felt it tugging in his heart. The vessel was magnificent. The woman pointed to the ship. The Enterprise. The enemy. Kirk was surprised. The ship didn't feel like the enemy. The woman looked at him. "Say it." "The Enterprise. The enemy." The woman adjusted another control on her pad. Kirk gasped with sudden pain. "Say it." Kirk gasped.
The Enterprise. The enemy.
The woman smiled at him. Instantly, Kirk felt the pain end. A wave of pleasure swept through him. She caressed his face. "The monsters who did this to you will not survive." He looked into her dark eyes.
Are we...
"Yes, I thought I had lost you. But they will not go unpunished."
Who?
"The enemy." Kirk looked past her at the Enterprise. It was a holographic model, he finally realized. A wave of fear swept through him as he gazed upon it. Utter revulsion. He glared at her.
The Federation.
She nodded. "Starfleet." Instantly, Kirk felt a stab of pain slice through his bowels.
Starfleet.
The image of the hated ship faded away, replaced by another, dynamic, bird-like, with a double hull and raptor-proud bridge. The Enterprise streaked at it, weapons blazing. The Raptor ship erupted in plasma, in death. The woman continued. A colony vessel, women and children farming supplies, and this. A planet spun through space. The holographic viewpoint spiraled in like a re-entering spacecraft. Below, Kirk stretched farming fields in checkerboard perfection. Over a rise, a city appeared. Fresh, bold, new. Then, the tractor beam struck, scooping up the city like a handful of dirt. Within the immense tractor beam, the delicate spires of the city's temples crumbled. He could hear the distant cries of hundreds, thousands. Kirk held Salatrell's hand. He reached out to her face, to her ears, traced their tips, then touched his own. Am I? She smiled. No, you are human, a patriot, dedicated to peace, non-interference, dedicated to the destruction of the enemy. Kirk nodded. The Enterprise, the Federation, Starfleet. Salatrell touched the pad she held at her side. What do you want to do? Kirk's pain increased. Destroy them. The pain did not just fade. It was replaced by pleasure. Are you glad you're back? Kirk nuzzled his face against her neck, lightly kissed the fine hairs that covered her nape. Yes, I'm glad. Who is the enemy? Kirk found it hard to concentrate. He needed her. Show me again. She aimed her pad at the holographically blurred corner, pressed a control. An image appeared there, life-size, a humanoid. Salatrell whispered, "The enemy. He must be destroyed. He must be killed." The figure reached for him from the holographic haze, gloating, fueled by the pain and the hate of the thousand atrocities committed by the Federation and Starfleet against the Romulan race. Kirk spoke the name of the enemy. Jean-Luc Picard. Jean-Luc Picard must die.